You have engaged with Jaan's work on a couple of occasions. You included his EG series in the Form Follows Fiction, your 2016 exhibition at the University of Toronto Art Museum. And then you subsequently revisited that series in a new series of your own, sort of taking a page from Jaan's work. So I wonder if you could talk about your long-standing dialogue with Jaan, what it means to you and to your kind of larger interest in Toronto histories, Toronto art legacies, thinking about how to historicize this city.
I mean, the question of Toronto came up in the documentary quite centrally. The documentary was very much about Jaan's work and the role of color and system, but also place was like a kind of running thread. And that was very much what the Form Follows Fiction exhibition that I curated was trying to hone in on. If you look at art made in the city over many decades, different generations, different styles, different genres, media, etc., you will notice that the practice of representing Toronto, like what Toronto looks like, is something Toronto artists, for the most part, avoid. However, my intuition was that the place and the conditions of making art in this place must come through in the work. If not in the guise of representation, then in another guise. So that was the question that guided that exhibition project. Jaan's work, I knew as a young artist, seeing it in Costin Clintworth exhibitions, I didn't engage with it very much. But I myself I'm very interested in monochrome painting, the tradition of monochrome painting. Some of my earliest work, but continues to this day, deal with kind of paint chip production. So using paint chips from the hardware store as the kind of sketch materials. In researching the Form Follows Fiction exhibition, I came across an article written by Robert Fones.
Yes. Fantastic article,
yeah, really amazing article that kind of theorized this idea of local color, right? So he was looking at the work of Greg Curnow, Joanne Todd, and Jaan Poldaas. And the EG series it's purely abstract in a certain way and purely representational in another way. It's a landscape painting, essentially, all of a kind of color palette of a particular place at a particular time. So that's what interested me about that work. I'm also very interested in the kind of, what Roald kind of referred to as this kind of non-aesthetic approach, where aesthetic decisions take a back seat, and what results from that kind of practice. I liked very much what Ihor said about this series of paintings as a kind of bottle without a message and a message without a bottle. I think looking at Toronto artistic production has that quality to it. There is no kind of history written that could serve as the message and the bottle put together. You're having to kind of navigate and understand something that you're in the milieu of. You have the map, but you don't have the legend, or you have the legend, but you don't have the map. And I think that's a very exciting place to be, and I think that's something deeply embedded in the culture here. So these are some of the things that interested me about that body of work. When we worked together, you invited me to participate in an exhibition at the Macintosh Gallery. The exhibition was titled Futurism, and you had your premise. I decided to revisit the EG series. So I created a series of monochrome paintings, 35 colors in all, just like the Jaan's work. And in a sense, they were also a kind of fingerprint of a place and time. So they weren't done in the late 70s, obviously. They were done in, I think, 2016 or something like 17 when we did the exhibition. So for that project, I migrated to Toronto from Lima in 1981. So when I made that piece for you, I revisited every place that I've lived in Toronto, and I've moved a lot in the city. But I revisited every place in 2016, 2017 for making this work. I acquired, there's a little device that Pantone makes that kind of allows you to sample colors in the world. So you can take the device and sample your pants, and it'll tell you the Pantone color that matches this sage color or whatever. So I did that visiting every place that I've lived in. I sampled colors in that location. So the door or a piece of garbage on the sidewalk or the mailbox or something like that. And out of that range of colors, I selected 35 and executed them as a series of paintings. For me, I think the thread, the connection to Greg Curnow, I think is very relevant. So I made this thinking about London, Ontario.
Which is where the exhibition was.
Exactly. And Greg Curnow, as being someone so intensely attuned to a feeling of place and a feeling of right here, right now, right? So much of his collages, his text paintings are about the irreproducible experience of right here, right now. And so these are some of the things that allowed me to kind of make that work and have a conversation with Jaan's work as well.
I wonder, as I was revisiting that EG series, I was thinking about these questions or the sort of tension between abstraction and representation that's particularly acute in that series, where on one level, it's a completely abstract series of monochromes, but then there's even this archival care that Jaan took in sampling these specific colors of the TTC, of the CN rail, of the AGO's packing crates, or reproducing, the kind of paint it was even, like having, an aerosol spray for some surfaces, having a matte finish, so it's really a representation, as you're also suggesting. I wonder how that speaks to your interest too, as someone who's been engaged for a long time in the monochrome, producing your own monochromes, but also very much thinking about questions of representation too.
Mm-hmm. I was rereading what I wrote about Jaan's work in the Form Follows Fiction catalog, and I wrote about monochrome paintings. I also wrote about his work, surprisingly, in relation to Tom Thomson's work.
Mm-hmm. I revisited that, yeah.
Yeah, so that was a kind of intriguing subtext. Thinking about Tom Thomson as a kind of non-pictorial landscape painter. He's not really working within a pictorialist tradition of, you have to have a mountain here and a tree here and a waterfall here to kind of create a picturesque composition. When you look at Tom Thomson's works, they're anti-picturesque. But what they do, and they focus on, is a kind of sensation of color, right? A very specific kind of temperature almost of a particular experience at a particular time. This is what connects it in my mind to Greg Curnow's work as well. So on the one hand, I referred Jaan's work to Tom Thomson, a rather counterintuitive reference point. And on the other hand, I related it to the modernist tradition of monochrome painting. Peter Kolinsnik was also included in the Form Follows Fiction exhibition as well, another painter of monochrome paintings. But what I write about monochromes there, I was paying attention to the fact that people hate monochrome paintings, right? They're very annoying to look at because most people see there's nothing to see. Like there's no. They kind of allow themselves to be hated.
Lazy.
Pardon me?
Lazy.
To be lazy? Yeah,
They're
exactly.
lazy. I'm sorry. There's something to deal with, so you can't be lazy.
Exactly. And so I'm interested in this tradition of of painting that almost sets itself up to be pilloried. You know, it kind of presents itself as an object of ridicule, of diminishment. And it's often read as a kind of aggressive act on the part of the artist, right? As a kind of sham or provocation or something like that. So,
in the color.
Pardon me?
Or pride in the color, the opposite. The glory of the color, of the selected color.
Yeah, that tends to happen once a certain kind of practice enters the marketplace. So kind of Yves Klein is a perfect example of this, where we talk about how sublime everything is, right? And so yes, there's a kind of glorification of color, but I think that's a kind of entry point into a market discourse, which some artists actively work against. You know, Blinky Palermo being like a kind of perfect example. There's a wonderful essay about Blinky's work called Modernism by the Yard, where he's literally buying bolts of monochrome cloth to stretch that almost won't permit a sublime discourse to happen. So anyway, this constellation of ideas, I think, are, especially in this body of work that we're sitting here, we don't have the legend to the map. And the paintings, the use of color is so idiosyncratic. There's so many in-between colors, that there are colors that are sort of orange, but sort of salmon, sort of pink. You know, so they're kind of more slippery than Jaan's work often tends to be. And I think it allows for a certain kind of free association, as I try to do in the essay writing, that creates new linkages. In the absence of this history, we're permitted to make linkages that might be counterintuitive and yet generate thought.